The return of the Golden Lion is getting closer and closer. In chapter 1131 of the One Piece manga, we got to see various animals that inhabit Elbaf's fauna, animals that appeared exactly 15 years ago during the Strong World movie, in which Shiki played the role of the main villain. For those who follow One Piece casually, you might not grasp the significance and hype this brings, but longtime fans know exactly how I feel about this. The legendary pirate, whose strength was on par with the Pirate King's, needed both Garp and Sengoku to join forces to defeat him. He was also the first prisoner to escape from Impel Down, all by himself, after cutting off his own leg. The man with one of the most overpowered devil fruits in the series, capable of nullifying gravity over anything with just a touch, making entire archipelagos and massive amounts of water levitate, becoming almost invincible in the sky. Today, we're going to recap who this legendary pirate is and explore all the evidence that points to his return in the series, including the new hints given in chapter 1131 of the One Piece manga. That's what you're going to find out in today's video. But first, make sure to leave a like and join my crew by subscribing down below with the bell turned on, because every week there's a new video about One Piece here on the channel. Deal? Now, let's start our adventure. Alright, Shiki was the main villain of the 10th One Piece movie, Strong World, released in 2009. But although the movie isn't considered canon, the character himself is canon, and has several mentions and appearances in the manga. Initially, Shiki was supposed to be mentioned for the first time during the conversation between Shanks and Whitebeard, but Oda decided it would be too much information at that time, so he left it out. Years later, Shiki was announced as the villain of the 10th One Piece movie, indicating that the character's fate had been removed from the main story so he could be used in this new film. However, as a sales strategy during the movie's release, Shiki was mentioned both in the manga and anime by Sengoku as the first criminal to escape from the great prison Impel Down. This mention essentially canonized the character in the main story, but initially only to create a connection with the movie's plot. Additionally, to further promote the movie, Oda wrote and illustrated a Chapter 0, which later received an anime adaptation called Episode 0. Both are considered canon. In this material, the story takes place over 20 years ago, just before the start of the pirate era, featuring several well-known characters, but focusing more on the past of the Golden Lion Shiki and building up his motivations that would lead to the events of the movie, about 20 years later. In summary, 27 years ago, 2 years before Goldie Roger and his crew reached Laugh Tale, Shiki discovered that Roger had found the location of an ancient weapon. Seeing an opportunity, he proposed an alliance to Roger. With his vast pirate fleet and Roger's knowledge of this weapon, Shiki believed they could conquer the world together and asked Roger to become his right-hand man. However, Roger declined the offer, saying he had no desire to conquer anything and that there was no point in being a pirate if he couldn't act according to his own will. Immediately afterward, a great naval battle broke out between their crews in what became known as the Battle of Ed War. The Roger pirates were destined to lose, but during the fight, a sudden storm turned the tide against Shiki, sinking half of his fleet. Shiki ended up with a piece of a ship's rudder lodged in his head, but grew to deeply respect Roger. When he learned that Roger had been captured, Shiki went alone to Marineford, where he faced numerous Marine soldiers. He was furious, refusing to believe anyone could have captured Roger. He then demanded that if Roger were to be killed, they should bring him so Shiki could kill him with his own hand. However, Admiral Sengoku appeared to inform him that Roger would be executed in Logetown within a week, aiming to break the spirit of all other pirates. Shiki became even more outraged upon hearing that the Pirate King's legend would end in the weakest sea of all, until Vice Admiral Garp showed up, replying that the East Blue was, in fact, a symbol of peace. Both Marines then prepared to fight Shiki, determined to prevent any interference in the execution, resulting in a battle that destroyed half of Marineford. In the end, Shiki was defeated, captured, and sent to Impel Down. While recovering in his cell, Shiki heard about the uproar surrounding the search for Roger's treasure, realizing that the legend of the Pirate King had truly come to an end. Determined to prove to the world that pirates were the true rulers, Shiki cut off his own legs to free himself from his chains, becoming the first prisoner to escape from the great prison of Impel Down, replacing his legs with his 2 swords. Shiki later met with Edward Newgate and invited him to join his plan, only to be quickly interrupted when Whitebeard threatened to throw him into the sea if he didn't shut up. In response, Shiki revealed that he would step away from the spotlight for a while, promising to show young pirates the true terror of the seas. Shortly after, he was seen on a mountain of an unexplored island in the Grand Line, where he began his preparations. Upon meeting the scientist from his crew, Dr. Indigo, Shiki inquired about the progress of his experiments. Indigo reported that he had discovered a balance between the plants and animals of that island, along with many species that didn't exist anywhere else. Impatient, Shiki interrupted him and demanded he get straight to the point, asking how long it would take to complete the plan. He was told it would take at least 20 years. Accepting the timeline, Shiki stated that by the end of that period, he would put his plan into action. He promised to bring hell to Earth, unleashing a massive number of mutant animals and declaring war on the world. This marks the end of the events of Episode 0. During the years he spent in the Mervale archipelago, Indigo managed to develop a drug that, when used on animals, enhanced their evolutionary process, allowing them to better adapt to their natural environment. With this impressive drug, Shiki began to create his own army of mutant animals with the goal of defeating the world government. In this sense, Shiki's plan was very similar to Kaido, who, instead of developing extremely strong mutant animals, focused his efforts on creating an army of animal-type devil fruit users. 20 years passed, and after gathering a large number of these animals, Shiki sent some to attack the East Blue, causing immense damage. He then reappeared to the world in Marineford, hovering above the island with his ship, destroying several marine vessels by levitating and crashing them down as a warning to his old enemies. Shiki possesses the Float fruit, which allows him to levitate any inanimate object with just a touch, effectively making gravity zero over those objects. This way, he built his archipelago of islands called Mervale, including his own ship, which he used as a base to sail the skies, earning him the title of the Flying Pirate. To give you an idea, this is such a powerful devil fruit that in a hypothetical battle against Admiral Fujitora, his gravity fruit wouldn't have any effect on Shiki, who can nullify gravity on things. The Golden Lion is a true natural predator for Admiral Fujitora. During the events of the movie, after the 20 years had passed, Shiki ends up encountering the Straw Hats, who, after a series of events, manage to defeat him and thwart the Golden Lion's plans. Shiki falls into the ocean near several marine ships, suggesting he was captured once more and taken to Impel Down. Now this is where the canonicity of these events becomes blurred and mixes a bit. Let's break it down. Shiki planned to put his plan into action after those 20 years, and all of the characters passed up until that point can be considered canon. But if the events of the movie aren't considered canon and the Golden Lion was never defeated by the Straw Hats, then what happened to the character? We've seen that the character does indeed exist in the manga, so if he wasn't captured again by the Marines, what's he up to these days? It's as if his past narrated in Episode 0 is canon, but his future narrated in the Strong World movie is filler. As I mentioned, this is where things get a little confusing. At first, we could very well interpret Shiki's past as canon and ignore the character's current situation, whether he's alive, dead, imprisoned, or whatever, and forget that the character exists since he already had a conclusion in the story, even if that conclusion is filler. In that case, both Sengoku's mention of Shiki in the manga and Chapter 0 would have served merely as promotional material for the film's release at the time and nothing more. In other words, it would be just a canonical background to entice people to go watch the movie in theaters. However, one thing we can't ignore is how Oda has been constantly reminding us of the character's existence at various points in the story, especially in recent years. It's as if Oda has been laying the groundwork to bring the character back, regardless of what excuse he needs to make. Whether it's asking us to ignore the events of the movie, or even asking us to consider the events of the movie and say that perhaps Shiki managed to escape at the end of the film. Take a look. The first hint of the character's return was on the cover of Chapter 631 of the manga. On it, we return to the Twin Capes, where we see Crocus sitting, chatting, and drinking with a figure with light, long hair, a typical Japanese straw hat, and a striped cloak. So far, so good. But when we look at the official colored version of this same image, the similarities between this person and the Golden Lion Shiki are undeniable. We can see his golden hair, now a bit shorter, a straw hat covering the rudder in his head, and a striped colored cloak with the exact same color palette as the one worn by the Golden Lion. Even the straw hat used by this figure perfectly matches the typically Japanese outfit worn by Shiki. Of course, one could argue that the colored manga, while official, is not colored by Oda himself, but let's be honest, I'm willing to bet there was a conversation about who that man really was, so that the colors used match the character he refers to. At the very least, you can't say it was just a coincidence. Now, why would the Golden Lion be chatting with a former member of the Roger Pirates, who was his rival? For the same reason we've seen Shiki himself sitting and chatting with Whitebeard, or Whitebeard sitting and talking with Roger. They were all rivals, but still maintained a respect and a certain fondness for each other. Many people also like to speculate that the man in the cover story is Scopper Gaban, another member of the Roger Pirates, which would actually make more sense since in that case, Crocus would be chatting with an old comrade. But again, I point to the official colored version of this image, which makes it much clearer that it's the Golden Lion Shiki. Still, even if that is indeed Shiki, It would only mean that the Golden Lion managed to escape from the Marines after the events of the movie, or that the events of the movie never happened. It doesn't necessarily mean that he has any intention of remaining active in the world of piracy, and he may have decided to retire and is enjoying the rest of his days drinking with old acquaintances here and there. Perhaps Oda's intention was to plant that seed of doubt and later decide what to do with it, or just make one last reference to the movie's villain in the manga. After all, this colored cover was drawn in chapter 631 of the manga, when the story was still in the Fishman Island arc back in 2011, only 2 years after the release of the Strong World movie. In recent years, Shiki has collected a series of mentions and increasingly frequent appearances in the manga. First, in chapter 962, Shiki was mentioned by Sengoku as a former member of the Rocks Pirates, who we later saw appearing in chapter 1096 during the God Valley incident. During the Wano arc, we saw Orochi's grandmother, Kurozumi Higurashi, demonstrating her former devil fruit power to mimic Shiki's appearance, proving that the two had come into contact when the old lady traveled around the world. At the time, it seemed like an Easter egg out of nowhere, but once again, Shiki's existence was brought back into the story. Moving forward to the more recent chapters of One Piece, at the end of the Egghead arc, we saw a shadow identical to the one seen on the cover of chapter 631, waiting for the Straw Hats to arrive. And now, in chapter 1131 of the manga, we saw that the animals making up the island's flora are the exact same animals that appear in the archipelago governed by Shiki during the Strong World movie. Guys, it's impossible to ignore that this is becoming a bigger and more frequent coincidence, and it feels more and more like Oda's been setting the stage for the Golden Lion's return to the story. It could be that the shadow waiting for the Straw Hats in Elbaf is someone else, Scopper Gaban, for example. Or it could be that the animals from the movie appearing in Elbaf are just a reuse of the design, but I'm finding it harder and harder to believe that. Now, if the Golden Lion's return is officially confirmed in the story, how does that impact the world of One Piece? First, about the Strong World movie's timeline, Oda might choose to ignore the movie's events and create a unique timeline for Shiki in the main story, or canonize the movie's events and say that Shiki managed to escape at the end. In that case, we'd have to accept that pre-time skip Luffy, with only his modest Gear 2 and Gear 3, managed to defeat a legendary pirate said to be equal to Roger himself, who needed both Garp and Sengoku to be taken down and imprisoned in Impel Down. Unfortunately, One Piece movies have this tendency to raise Luffy's power level to a completely inconsistent level with the manga, just for the sake of spectacle and ticket sales, having him defeat villains he would never be able to beat in the main story. Now, regardless of the direction Oda chooses to take, the fact is that the Golden Lion has a devil fruit power that's totally in line with the current arc of One Piece. As I've been saying to you guys over the past few months, Elbaf is an arc that's likely to explore more of the Sky Islands in the One Piece world, and Shiki, known as the flying pirate capable of levitating entire archipelagos with his power, has the perfect setting for his abilities to be properly showcased. After all, if the One Piece world is about to sink into the ocean, those with the ability to fly will be safe, and the Golden Lion is one of them. So, I want to know if you're with me or not regarding Shiki's return to the manga. Leave a comment below because I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you stayed until the end, enjoyed the video, and haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to hit that like button. Check your subscription down below so you don't miss upcoming videos, and if you missed the review of the latest manga chapter, that video will now pop up on your screen for you to watch, alright?